Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So as you know, Wednesdays are Wildcard Wednesdays here on Instant Deck Tech, and today's deck is certainly wild. We are heading to Modern to check out a mono blue mill deck, and this deck is really crazy, going really deep, and it's also really cheap. So if you are a big mill fan, it's pretty budget friendly if you want to give it a shot. This version recently took Dakota Mills to a top 8 finish at a SCG Modern IQ, so congrats to Dakota on their finish with the deck. A quick reminder before we break it all down: if you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, probably including a sideboard, because it doesn't have a sideboard, take a minute and click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So we've seen mill decks before in Modern. They're not all that uncommon. I mean, they're fairly uncommon, but we've seen them. Mostly blue-black mill decks, but this one is unique and very original. So first off, we start by putting up a wall of defense to buy us time while we're waiting to mill our opponent out. Kraken Hatchling and Fogbank, just 1 and 2 mana blockers. They're never going to damage the opponent because they don't have any power, but they're pretty good at blocking for their mana cost. And then Bell Tower Sphinx kind of transitions us from blockers into cards that can also start milling. So 5 toughness, also 5 mana, only 2 power, so not a good attacker, but whenever it's dealt damage, the opponent has to mill that many cards. So if you just chump with it for a while, your opponent's going to end up milling a bunch of cards with this repeatable effect. Plus, if you ever block like an Emrakul or something, that's a lot of milling all in one shot. So put up the wall of defense with these random blue creatures, and then start the milling. So first off, we have Tome Scour, mills 5 cards for 1 mana, and then Mind Sculpt, as you curve out with the mill, 7 cards for 2 manas, and then Traumatize has potential to be incredibly powerful or incredibly bad, depending on the scenario. So it mills half of your opponent's library. You can also target yourself, but in this deck you're targeting the opponent typically. So half of the cards in their library, which means if you haven't cast any of their mill cards and you cast this on turn 5, you're probably going to mill like 25-ish cards, 24 cards for 5 mana, which is a pretty good deal. On the other hand, if you've already been Tome Scouring and Mind Sculpting and your opponent only has like 20 cards left in their deck, then it's probably only going to mill 8, 10 cards, 12 cards, depending on your opponent's library. So the more you mill, the worse Traumatize gets, but still can mill a ton of cards. Then the deck gets a little bit crazy. So Psychic Spiral can be a super powerful mill card. You shuffle your graveyard into your library, and for every card that you put into your graveyard, your opponent has to mill one. So if you can get most of your library into your graveyard, Psychic Spiral can just mill your opponent out. It does this at instant speed as well, so you can play around counter spells, but the deck doesn't really have a good way to fill their graveyard because you're not like self-milling or anything. Sure, you get your Tome Scours and stuff in there. This is where Jace's Archivist comes into play. Jace's Archivist is a Wheel of Fortune on a body. 3 mana, you get a 2/2, but you can pay a blue and tap it, and each player discards his or her hand and draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards discarded that way. So it's a windfall on a stick, repeatable. So you're discarding all your cards, drawing cards, hopefully finding more mill, discarding cards. That fuels your graveyard for your Psychic Spiral kill. Jace's Archivist also does some other things, because the deck is playing 4 Jace's Erasure, which is kind of the mini Sphinx's Tutelage, and 1 Sphinx's Tutelage. So these are cards that mill whenever you draw a card. So Jace's Erasure mills 1, Sphinx's Tutelage mills 2, can double up occasionally. So when you wheel or windfall with Jace's Archivist, you're going to trigger your Jace's Erasure a bunch of times, you're going to trigger your Sphinx's Tutelage a bunch of times, hopefully mill your opponent a whole bunch. So the deck actually really focuses on drawing cards for the Tutelage and the Jace's Erasure. It's kind of Jace tribal. You get 1 Jace Memory Adept and 1 Jace Bellerin. Both Jaces give you the ability to draw cards, trigger your Tutelages, your Jace's Erasure. Jace Memory Adept can also just mill in chunks of 10 itself, which is not bad. And then we have where the deck goes really deep. Consecrated Sphinx draws 2 cards for you whenever your opponent draws a card. Even more triggers for your Sphinx's Tutelage, your Jace's Erasure. Then you get a clone and a stolen identity. Most likely to copy your Sphinx, because you don't really want to copy your Kraken Hatchling, I don't think, or your Fog Bank. So you copy up your Sphinx a bunch of times, draw a ton more cards, and your Consecrated Sphinx is going to trigger when you do the wheel effect with your Jace's Archivist a whole bunch of times, so you can kind of get the combo mill kill if you have a Consecrated Sphinx on the battlefield, and all your enchantments, and copy your Sphinx a bunch of times and just go to town. Last but not least, Jace's Phantasm, kind of the backup win condition. 1 mana, 1/1 with flying, but if there's 10 or more cards in your opponent's graveyard, becomes a 5/5 flyer for 1 mana, which is pretty powerful. So you could theoretically win with creature beats. It's also just a good blocker as a 5/5. So that is a mono blue mill. That with 20 islands thrown into the mix, which probably isn't enough if you're casting 5 mana Jaces and 6 mana stolen identities, but that's a story for another time. But that is mono blue mill for Modern, and that's been our instant deck tech for today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.